I'm Nina, 32 female. I live in a city I chose for myself, in an apartment I paid for myself, with a life I built for myself piece by painstaking piece. I work as a data scientist, which means I spend my days finding patterns in chaos and building predictive models, a skill that, until recently, I never thought to apply to my own family. For my entire life, I've been the reliable one, the quiet fixer, the stable bedrock upon which my parents and my younger sister, Sophia, built their far more glamorous lives. But I recently learned that a bedrock is only valued when it's being stood upon. The rest of the time, it's just part of the dirt. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My family operates on a simple, unspoken principle. Sophia shines, and I support the infrastructure that allows her to do so. My sister, Sophia, is a luxury event planner. Her life is a curated feed of champagne towers, exclusive venues, and designer outfits. She is effervescent, charming, and breathtakingly beautiful, the sun around which our family has always orbited. My parents, Richard and Alina, are her biggest fans. My father, a high-level investment banker, sees her social climbing as a direct reflection of his success. My mother, an art gallery curator, views Sophia as her greatest masterpiece, a living sculpture of beauty and social grace. They speak of her accomplishments in loud, proud tones at every opportunity. Her successes were family successes. Her struggles were family crises. Then there's me, Nina, the data scientist, the quiet one, the sensible one, the one who traded glamour for stability, who preferred Python scripts to parties. My achievements were met with a polite nod. "Oh, that's nice, dear." When I graduated with top honors, my parents were at Sophia's dance recital. When I bought my first apartment, they were helping her move into a trendier, more expensive rental that she couldn't quite afford. When I got a major promotion, they were funding her trip to Milan for Fashion Week. My successes were footnotes in the grand story of Sophia. I was the family's stable, low-risk bond in a portfolio full of exciting, high-yield stocks. I was the emergency fund, the cosigner, the one they called when a credit card was maxed out or a deposit was due. I was the unseen pillar holding up the beautiful facade. For years, I told myself it didn't matter. I loved them, and this was my role. I found fulfillment in my career, my friendships, and the quiet, orderly life I had built. My best friend, Ben, an architect, often pointed out the imbalance. "They're not just taking you for granted, Nina," he'd say over coffee. "They're actively devaluing you. A foundation is the most important part of a house, but no one sends out party invitations to look at the concrete." I would always brush it off. "It's just how they are," I'd reply. But a foundation can only bear so much weight before cracks begin to appear. The latest and greatest weight was my parents' dream house. After decades of living in a perfectly lovely suburban home, they decided they needed an upgrade. They found a sprawling, modern monstrosity in the most exclusive part of town, a place with more glass walls than solid ones, and a price tag that was eye-watering even for my father. Richard's finances were tied up in long-term investments, and my mother's gallery salary was more for prestige than profit. Despite their wealthy appearance, their liquid assets were surprisingly thin. The bank was hesitant. Their debt-to-income ratio was too high. They needed a cosigner with a significant, stable income and a perfect credit score to secure the loan. They needed me. I remember the dinner where they asked. It was at their favorite upscale Italian restaurant. Sophia was there, sparkling in a new dress, talking about a celebrity wedding she was planning. My father waited for a pause in her monologue, then cleared his throat. "Nina," he began, his tone shifting to the serious, businesslike voice he used for important matters. "Your mother and I need your help." He laid it all out. The house was their legacy, he said. It was a place for the family to gather for generations. It was for Sophia's future children to play in, for them to host parties that befitted their station. It was an investment in the family's future. My mother chimed in, her voice soft and persuasive. "It would mean the world to us, dear. It's just a signature, really. A formality. Your father and I will handle all the payments, of course. It's just to get the bank to say yes. Sophia barely looked up from her phone but managed to add, "Yeah, Nina. It's the least you could do. You don't have a husband or kids, so it's not like you have any real expenses." The comment was classic Sophia, a casual, backhanded swipe designed to remind me of my place, but I ignored it as I always did. I looked at my parents' hopeful, expectant faces. This was my purpose in the family, wasn't it? To provide the stability they lacked, to be the pillar. So I agreed. I went to the bank. I sat through hours of meetings. I signed dozens of documents, my signature, my good name, my financial history, my years of hard work intertwined with theirs on a multi-million-dollar loan. The loan was approved. My parents were ecstatic. They closed on the house a week later. The anniversary dinner was meant to be a dual celebration, 36 years of marriage and the acquisition of their new palace. I had no idea it would also be the night the pillar decided to crumble. The restaurant was my mother's choice. It was painfully exclusive, the kind of place where the waiters sneer if your handbag isn't from the correct season. A massive crystal chandelier dripped light onto tables draped in heavy white linen. It felt suffocating, a perfect setting for the slow-motion implosion of my life as I knew it. My parents were holding court at the head of a long table, glowing. Richard had ordered the most expensive champagne, and Alina was accepting toasts from family friends they'd invited to share in their joy. I was seated halfway down the table, wedged between a distant aunt who only wanted to talk about her new poodle and an uncle who kept asking why a pretty girl like me wasn't married yet. Sophia was seated directly across from me, a smug, satisfied smile playing on her lips. She had just finished a long, dramatic story about a minor crisis at a recent event, casting herself as the brilliant, unflappable heroine. Everyone was captivated. I tried to be present, to feel the joy they were all so performatively displaying. I had helped make this happen. The house, the celebration, this entire expensive evening, it was all standing on the foundation of my financial stability. A small part of me, a naive, hopeful part, thought that maybe tonight would be different. Maybe they would finally acknowledge my contribution. My father stood to make a toast. He raised his glass, his eyes sweeping across the table. "To my beautiful wife, Alina," he began, his voice thick with emotion. 36 years of partnership, of love, of building a life together. He went on to thank their friends for coming, and then his eyes landed on Sophia. "And to my daughter, Sophia, who makes us proud every single day. Your star shines so brightly, and you bring so much joy and prestige to this family. We are so blessed." The table erupted in applause. People clinked their glasses with Sophia's. She preened, lapping up the attention. My father's gaze passed right over me, as if I were a piece of furniture, a part of the scenery. There was no mention of my role in securing the house, no nod to the person who had made this new chapter possible. I wasn't just unseen, I was invisible. A knot of cold, hard resentment began to form in my stomach. I took a slow sip of water, my hand trembling slightly. I told myself to let it go. It was their night. It wasn't about me. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. It was time for my lesson to be delivered, not with a gentle nudge, but with a sledgehammer. As the main courses were being cleared, the conversation lulled for a moment. It was then that Sophia chose to strike. She leaned forward across the table, her eyes glittering with a familiar, cruel amusement. She raised her champagne flute, angling it just enough so that only I and a few people next to us could hear her clearly. "I'd like to make my own little toast," she said, her voice a syrupy whisper that didn't quite mask its venomous intent. She looked directly at me, a smirk tugging at the corner of her perfectly glossed lips. "Here's to Nina," she said, her voice just loud enough to carry. "To the family disappointment who still thinks she's important." Time seemed to slow down. The clinking of cutlery, the low murmur of conversation, it all faded into a dull roar in my ears. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity, the casual cruelty of her words. It wasn't just the insult itself, but the public delivery, the deliberate act of humiliation in front of others. I looked to my mother, my automatic, lifelong instinct kicking in. I expected her to admonish Sophia, to say her name in that sharp, warning tone she reserved for bad behavior. Instead, Eleanor just laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but a small, dismissive chuckle, as if Sophia had just told a clever, private joke. She gave Sophia a tiny, approving nod, a silent affirmation of the sentiment. That laugh was the sound of a final snap. It was the sound of 32 years of being diminished, overlooked, and undervalued, crystallizing into a single moment of painful clarity. My father hadn't heard, already engaged in a loud conversation with the man beside him, but my mother had, and she had endorsed it, in thaw. T-moment, I saw everything with a stark, brutal honesty. I wasn't a pillar, I was a doormat, a tool to be used and then discarded or worse, mocked for my utility. They didn't see my stability as a strength, they saw it as a sign of a boring, passionless life, a life that existed only to serve their own. The hurt was so sharp, so intense, it was almost physical. It felt like a punch to the gut, stealing all the air from my lungs. But beneath the hurt, something else was stirring. A cold, quiet anger. A resolve that felt as solid and unyielding as steel. I didn't say a word. I didn't cry or yell or make a scene. I simply looked at Sophia, then at my mother, and I gave them nothing. My face was a blank mask. I stayed quiet. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the ridiculously expensive sea bass I had lost my appetite for. And as I chewed the tasteless food, a plan began to form. A simple, elegant, and devastating plan. I excused myself from the table about 20 minutes later, claiming a sudden migraine. It wasn't entirely a lie. The stress and anger had coiled into a tight, pounding band around my skull. My mother waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, feel better, dear," she said, already turning back to her conversation. My father gave me a brief, distracted "good night, honey." Sophia didn't even look up. No one walked me to the door. No one asked if I was okay to drive. Their perfunctory goodbyes were just another layer of proof. My presence was not required once my function had been served. The valet brought my sensible, reliable sedan to the front of the restaurant, a little gray island in a sea of gleaming black Mercedes and BMWs. The drive home was a blur. The city lights smeared across my windshield as I moved through the streets on autopilot. The radio was off. The silence in the car was absolute, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. Sophia's words echoed in my head. The family disappointment who still thinks she's important. And my mother's laugh, a soft, tinkling sound that had shattered my world. Every memory of every slight, every time I had been pushed aside, every holiday I'd spent helping in the kitchen while Sophia held court in the living room, every check I'd written to cover one of her emergencies. It all coalesced into a single, unbearable weight. For my entire life, I had operated under the assumption that if I were just good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, they would eventually see me. They would value me. That night, I finally accepted the truth. They never would. My value to them was entirely transactional. I was their safety net, their financial backstop, their guarantee, and they felt entitled to it. They felt so secure in my unending support that they could openly mock me, confident that there would be no consequences. That was my second realization. Their greatest weakness was their absolute certainty in my eternal compliance. They had no idea who I was, what I was capable of, because they had never bothered to look. When I got back to my apartment, the quiet, minimalist space I had curated for myself, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the darkness to my home office, the glow of my monitors casting long shadows on the walls. My apartment was my sanctuary, a place where everything was orderly, logical, and under my control. A place that was wholly mine with no cosigners. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and took a deep breath. The anger had burned away, leaving behind a chilling calm. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about data. The data point was clear. My investment in my family was yielding negative returns. It was time to divest. I opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard, muscle memory taking over. I navigated to my secure online folder labeled Finances. Inside was a subfolder, Parents' Lakeview House. I had scanned every single page of the loan agreement before I signed it. As a data scientist, I live and breathe details. I don't sign anything I haven't read at least 3 times. I remembered a specific clause, one I had noted at the time but dismissed as standard legal boilerplate. It was a rescission clause. Under federal law, for certain types of credit transactions, you have a right of rescission, or a right to cancel the contract within a short period. For a mortgage refinancing or a home equity loan, it's typically 3 business days after the transaction closes. The closing had been on Thursday. It was now Saturday night. I had until midnight on Monday to act. My heart started beating faster, not with anxiety, but with a thrilling, terrifying sense of power. It was possible. It was actually possible. I pulled up the document and read the clause again, my screen illuminating my face in the darkroom. The language was dense, but the meaning was unmistakable. As a co-signer who was not residing in the property, I had the right to rescind my part of the agreement within the stipulated timeframe. The loan LD be voided, the funding would be pulled, the house, their dream house, would be gone. I found the official rescission form I had received in the closing packet. It was a simple, one-page document. I downloaded a fresh copy from the bank's website. It required my name, the loan number, the property address, and my signature. That was it. No lengthy explanation was needed. No justification was required. It was a simple, contractual right. I filled in the blanks, the clicking of my keyboard the only sound in the apartment. Name, Nina. Loan number, 74B882C9. Property address, 11 Lakeview Drive. I paused with my cursor hovering over the digital signature line. This was the point of no return. This was not just signing a form, it was detonating a bomb in the middle of my family. It was burning a bridge and salting the earth behind me. Was I ready for the fallout? For the screaming, the accusations, the inevitable casting out? I thought of Sophia's smirk. I heard my mother's laugh. I saw my father's oblivious smile as he toasted everyone but me. Yes, I was ready. I clicked the mouse. I typed my name. I attached the signed document to a new email. The recipient was the bank's loan processing department. I found the direct email address for the senior loan officer who had handled our case. I added her to the to line. I put the legal department's general counsel in CC. I wanted to be sure it was received and processed immediately on Monday morning. The subject line was clear and professional. Notice of rescission loan 74B882C9. I wrote a short, polite body text. To whom it may concern, please see the attached signed document exercising my right of rescission for the above-referenced loan agreement. Please confirm receipt. Sincerely, Nina. I took one last, deep breath and hit send. The email disappeared from my outbox with a soft swoosh. It was done. It was just after midnight. A single email, sent in the dark, had just changed everything. Sunday was the quietest day of my life. I woke up feeling strangely light, as if a physical weight had been lifted from my shoulders overnight. The migraine was gone. The knot in my stomach was gone. In their place was a serene, almost unnerving calm. I had spent my entire adult life anticipating my family's needs, managing their expectations, and bracing for their casual dismissals. For the first time, I wasn't. I was a free agent. My phone buzzed around 10 a.m. It was a text from my mother. Hope your headache is better. Your father and I are going to the new house to measure for curtains. Sophia is meeting us there. Wish you could come. The exclamation point felt like a tiny dagger. There was no apology, no "are you okay?" Just a cheerful report of their activities designed to make me feel like I was missing out. The old Nina would have felt a pang of guilt, a yearning to be included. She would have texted back, feeling much better, have fun, send pics. The new Nina simply looked at the message, felt nothing, and put her phone on silent. I did not reply. I decided to spend the day reclaiming myself. I went for a long run along the waterfront, the crisp air feeling clean in my lungs. I listened to a podcast, not the finance one my father always recommended, but a history one that I loved. I went to a farmer's market and bought fresh vegetables, things Sophia would call peasant food. I went home and made myself a large, elaborate brunch, eating it slowly while sitting in the patch of sun that streamed through my living room window. Every action felt deliberate, a small declaration of independence. This is my life. This is what I enjoy. This is for me. Late in the afternoon, my friend Ben called. He was the only person I was willing to talk to. "Hey," he said, his voice warm and steady. "You went completely dark after that dinner. I was getting worried. Everything okay?" "Everything is about to be," I replied, a small smile on my face. I told him everything. The toast, my mother's laugh, the drive home, the rescission clause, the email. I relayed the entire story in a calm, flat voice, like a scientist presenting a paper. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I worried I had shocked him, that he would think I had gone too far. Then he let out a low whistle. "Wow, Nina, wow, I always knew you were a genius, but this is a whole other level. Are you ready for what comes next?" "I don't know," I admitted, the first crack in my calm facade. "I'm not sure what to expect. Anger, definitely. Crying, guilt trips. What do you think?" Ben, ever the architect, thought in terms of structure. "They're going to see it as a declaration of war," he said. "You didn't just refuse to help them, you helped them and then took it away. You let them hold their dream in their hands and then you made it disappear. It's the ultimate power move. They're going to lose their minds." "Good," I said, and the coldness in my own voice surprised me. "You need a plan," he continued. "Not for your revenge, that's already in motion. You need a plan for you. When the calls start, what's your response? When they show up at your door, what do? You need to set your boundaries now, before they try to smash through them." He was right. My family operated like a high-pressure system. They would rush to fill any vacuum I left. If I showed any weakness, any hesitation, they would exploit it mercilessly. We spent the next hour talking it through, role-playing the inevitable conversations. For my father, he would lead with a mix of panic and anger, focusing on the financial chaos I had caused. He would demand an explanation. The strategy: stay calm, be factual. My signature is my responsibility, and I was no longer comfortable with the arrangement. It was a financial decision. No emotion, no mention of the dinner. Giving them an emotional hook would only give them ammunition. For my mother, she would be the master of emotional manipulation. She would cry. She would talk about how much she had sacrificed for me, how I was tearing the family apart, how I was being selfish and cruel. The strategy: be a gray rock. "I'm sorry you feel that way. This was a personal decision. I'm not going to discuss this further. Repeat as necessary. Do not engage with the guilt." For Sophia, she would be pure venom. She would attack, insult, and try to provoke a reaction. The strategy: complete and total silence. Block her number. Do not engage on any level. Her words only had power if I let them. "And what if they show up at your apartment?" Ben asked. "I won't let them in," I said, the words feeling solid and real as I spoke them. "My home is my space. They are no longer welcome in it without an invitation." After we hung up, I felt stronger, more prepared. The calm had returned, but now it was reinforced with a steel framework of strategy. I looked at the clock. It was Sunday evening. The storm would break in the morning. I made myself a cup of tea, sat on my balcony overlooking the city, and watched the sun go down. I thought about the house they had been so proud of, the one they were measuring for curtains in. I imagined the lone officer opening her email at 8:30 a.m. The frantic call to her supervisor, the official notification being typed up, the email being sent to my parents' real estate agent and lawyer. I could picture the exact sequence of events, a perfect, logical cascade of consequences. For the first time, I felt a sense of control. I wasn't just reacting to my family, I was setting the terms. The night was peaceful. It was the calm before the storm, and I was the one who had seeded the clouds. Monday morning, I woke up before my alarm. I didn't feel tired, I felt electric, a low hum of anticipation vibrating under my skin. I went through my normal routine, a workout, a shower, a strong cup of black coffee, but everything felt heightened, sharper. I was acutely aware of the time. 8:00 a.m. 8:15 a.m. 8:30 a.m. I pictured the lone officer, Sarah, arriving at her desk, sipping her own coffee as she booted up her computer. My email would be sitting there, near the top of her inbox, its subject line a blandly professional harbinger of doom. I logged into my work computer at 8:35 a.m. My job was fully remote, another small mercy I was grateful for. I wouldn't have to face a day of pretending everything was normal in an office full of people. I opened my current project, a complex dataset that required my full attention, and tried to immerse myself in the numbers. But my eyes kept flicking to the digital clock in the corner of my screen. 8:39 a.m. Any minute now. At exactly 8:41 a.m., my personal phone, which I had placed face down on my desk, began to vibrate. The screen lit up with a name, Dad. I stared at it. The first tremor, I let it go to voicemail. 2 seconds later, it started vibrating again. Dad, I ignored it. It rang a third time, and a fourth. The calls came one after another, a frantic, insistent barrage. He wasn't even waiting for the voicemail to kick in, he was just hanging up and immediately redialing. It was a digital scream of panic. I watched, mesmerized, as the call log filled up. 5 calls, 10, 15. He was behaving like a man whose house was on fire, and in a way it was. While his calls continued their relentless assault, an email notification popped up on my screen. It was from Sarah, the loan officer. Subject, Ray. Notice of rescission loan 74B 882C9. Dear Nina, this email confirms receipt of your notice of rescission for the above-referenced loan. The notice was received within the legally stipulated 3-day window. The loan agreement has been voided, and all related funding has been terminated, effective immediately. Our legal department has formally notified all relevant parties, including the seller's representatives and your co-borrower's legal counsel. Sincerely, Sarah Matthews, Senior Lending Officer. It was so clean, so professional, so final. I took a screenshot and saved it to a secure folder, then archived the email. My father was now on his 23rd consecutive call. This was a man who prided himself on his composure, his cool-headedness in a crisis. To see him reduced to this frantic, repetitive action told me everything I needed to know. The news had landed, and it had been a direct hit. Then a new number lit up my screen, my mother. I let it ring. Voicemail. She called back immediately. Her approach was different. She let it ring the full duration, then waited a minute before calling again, more methodical, more deliberate. I could almost hear the strategy session happening on their end. Richard, stop calling like a madman. You're getting nowhere. Let me try. A text message from her popped up. Nina, you need to call me. Now, it is a family emergency. I read the text and felt a flicker of amusement. She had no idea that she was the emergency. The family was the emergency. I was the escapee. Then came Sophia. Her text was far more direct. What did you do? Followed by a string of angry emojis. Then another. Mom is crying. Dad looks like he's going to have a heart attack. You have to fix this. Whatever this is, fix it now. Her texts were pure, unfiltered entitlement. The assumption that I was not only the cause but also the required solution. The idea that I would or could fix it was laughable. There was nothing to fix. I had simply withdrawn my consent. You can't unring a bell, and you can't unrescind a loan agreement after the deadline. I blocked Sophia's number. It felt like closing a door on a constant, irritating noise. By 9:15 a.m., my father's calls had finally stopped. The final count was 38 missed calls. The silence that followed was almost more jarring than the ringing. I knew what was happening. They were regrouping, calling their lawyer, calling the real estate agent. They were being told, in no uncertain terms, that what I had done was perfectly legal and irreversible. The foundation of their dream house, the one they had been measuring for curtains just yesterday, had been reduced to dust. And the pillar they had always leaned on was no longer there. I spent the rest of the morning working, my focus sharper than it had been in months. The background noise of family obligation that had hummed in my mind for years was gone. The quiet was productive. It was peaceful. Around noon, I got an email. It was from my father's personal account. The subject line was just my name. Nina. The email itself was short, the tone a complete departure from his panicked calls. It was cold, controlled fury. I don't know what game you are playing or what kind of cruel, childish stunt this is, but you have created a catastrophic mess. We have lawyers involved. You have exposed this family to significant financial and legal jeopardy. Be at our house tonight at 7 p.m. We are going to talk about the damage you have caused." It wasn't a request. It was a summons, a command. The king ordering his disobedient subject to appear before him to be judged. I read the email once, then twice. My plan with Ben had been to ignore them, to refuse to engage, but this was different. This was a direct challenge. Maybe a confrontation was necessary after all. Maybe it was time to stop being a gray rock and start being the mountain. I replied with a single sentence. "I will not be there tonight or any other night. This was a financial decision, and it is final. Do not contact me again." I hit send, and then, for good measure, I set up a filter to send all emails from my parents' addresses directly to a folder I named Archive. The storm had broken, and I was still standing. The fallout was nuclear. My decision to not only detonate the bomb, but also refuse the summons sent my family into a state of apoplectic rage. The quiet of my Monday afternoon was shattered by a new wave of attacks, this time from extended family. My aunt, the one with the poodle, left me a rambling, tearful voicemail about how I was breaking my mother's heart. My uncle, the one who'd called my father, sent a text that read, "Your father is a proud man. You have humiliated him. I am disgusted by your behavior." It was clear my parents had activated their network, painting me as a villainous, unstable monster who had inexplicably turned on her loving family. The narrative was set. I was the problem. My actions were a sudden, crazy betrayal, not the logical conclusion of decades of disrespect. I stuck to the plan Ben and I had formulated. I didn't answer. I didn't reply. I read the messages with a detached, clinical curiosity, like a scientist observing specimens under a microscope. Each message was a data point that confirmed my hypothesis. Their love was conditional, and the condition was my absolute, unquestioning compliance. The moment I asserted a boundary, I became the enemy. My phone was a battlefield, so I turned it off. The silence was a relief. I ordered in my favorite Thai food, put on a movie, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt truly, completely at peace in my own home. I was no longer on call. The next day, the attack escalated. Around lunchtime, my work phone rang. It was an internal call from the front desk of my company's building, even though I worked remotely. "Hi, Nina," the receptionist said, her voice hesitant. "There's a woman here named Alina who says she's your mother. She's quite upset. She's demanding to see you." My blood ran cold. They had come to my workplace, a place that had been my refuge, my separate world. They were trying to breach my last line of defense. This crossed a line I hadn't even anticipated. "Tell her I work remotely and am not in the building," I said, my voice steady despite the shock. "And please inform building security that she is not to be allowed up under any circumstances. She is not an approved visitor." "Of course," the receptionist said, her tone now sympathetic. I hung up, my hands shaking. This was a tactic of desperation, a public shaming meant to force my hand. 2 hours later, Ben called. "You are not going to believe this," he said, his voice a mix of awe and anger. "I just got a call from your dad." "What?" I gasped. "How did he even get your number?" "Your mom must have gotten it from my mom at some charity thing years ago," he said. He didn't yell. It was worse. He was calm. "He told me he was worried about you, that you were having some kind of breakdown. He asked if I knew what was wrong, if you'd been acting erratically. He was trying to build a case, Nina. He was trying to get me to co-sign his narrative that you're mentally unstable." I felt sick. They weren't just angry, they were trying to discredit me, to invalidate my decision by painting me as unwell. It was a classic manipulation tactic. If you can't win the argument, attack the person's sanity. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I told him that you were the most stable, rational person I knew," Ben said, his voice firm. "And that if you made a decision like this, you must have had an extremely good reason. Then I told him to lose my number and never contact me again." Relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to tears. To have someone in my corner, someone who believed in me without question, was an anchor in the storm. The final confrontation came that evening. I was watering my plants when there was a loud, insistent knocking at my apartment door. Not a polite rap, but a heavy, demanding banging. I looked through the peephole. It was my father. He was alone. His face was gray with stress and exhaustion, but his eyes were burning with a cold fire. "Nina, I know you're in there. Open this door right now," he yelled, his voice muffled but clear. I didn't move. I just stood there, watching his distorted image through the tiny lens. He was the man who had taught me how to ride a bike, who had helped me with my calculus homework. He was also the man who had never once, in 32 years, told me he was proud of me. He was the man who had sat silently while his other daughter and his wife humiliated me. He banged on the door again, harder this time. "Nina, so help me, if you don't open this door, we can lose everything. The sellers are threatening to sue us for breach of contract. Do you understand what you've done?" His voice was cracking, the panic from the 38 missed calls finally breaking through his rage. I understood perfectly. He wasn't there for me. He wasn't there to ask why I had done it or to apologize. He was there because he was in trouble and he needed me, the family fixer, to fix it. He saw me as a function, not a person. My signature, my credit score, my compliance, that was Nina to him. I stayed silent, I waited. He banged on the door for another 5 minutes, his yells eventually turning into desperate pleading. "Nina, please, just talk to me. We can fix this. Whatever it is, we can fix it." But he was wrong. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. And some things aren't broken at all, they're finally working as they should. Eventually, the banging stopped. I heard him sigh, a long, ragged sound of defeat. I heard his footsteps recede down the hallway. I stayed by the door for a long time, my hand resting on the lock. I had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a necessary amputation. Painful, bloody, but ultimately life-saving. The weeks that followed were a study in silence. After my father's appearance at my door, the barrage of communication ceased entirely. It was as if a switch had been flipped. No more calls, no more texts, no more emails from anyone in my family's orbit. They had excommunicated me. The quiet was profound. In the beginning, it was jarring. I'd find myself bracing for a text that never came, flinching at the sound of my phone ringing, only to see it was a friend or a work call. Habits of a lifetime are hard to break. The phantom limb of my family role still ached from time to time. Ben was my rock through it all. We'd meet for coffee, or he'd come over and we'd cook dinner and he would just let me talk. He never told me what to feel. He just listened. "It's okay to grieve, Nina," he told me one evening as we sat on my balcony. "You didn't just lose them, you lost the idea of them. You're grieving the family you wished you had." He was right. I was grieving the parents who would have defended me, the sister who would have been a friend, the family that would have seen my worth beyond a signature on a loan document. Accepting that this family never truly existed was the hardest part. Through a mutual acquaintance, I heard bits and pieces of the aftermath. My parents had lost the house, of course. The sellers had indeed threatened a lawsuit, and my parents had to forfeit their substantial down payment to avoid a protracted legal battle. It was a massive financial blow. My father, the proud investment banker, had been deeply humiliated. They had to sell their old house quickly to cover their losses and ended up moving into a much smaller condominium, a significant step down in the social hierarchy they valued so much. Sophia was apparently furious, her rage directed not just at me, but at her parents for putting the family in such a precarious position. The beautiful facade had crumbled, revealing the shaky foundations beneath. Their lives, once curated for public admiration, were now a mess they couldn't hide. I felt a strange sense of detachment hearing this news, not pleasure or guilt, but a distant, clinical sadness. Their house of cards had fallen, and it had nothing to do with me anymore. As the silence stretched into months, my life began to expand. The mental and emotional energy I had once poured into managing my family was now mine to reinvest. I took on a challenging new project at work that led to another promotion. I started taking pottery classes on weekends, something I'd always wanted to do. I found joy in the simple, tangible act of creating something with my own hands. I started dating again, cautiously at first, but with a newfound clarity about what I wanted and deserved in a partner: respect, kindness, and reciprocity. The space that my family had once occupied was now being filled with things that nourished me, with people who saw me and valued me for who I was. About 6 months after the anniversary dinner, a letter arrived. It was on my mother's elegant, cream-colored stationery. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened, but curiosity won out. I opened it with a sense of dread. It was a single page, written in her perfect, looping cursive. She didn't apologize. She didn't admit fault. Instead, she wrote about her disappointment in me, about how my lashing out had hurt her and my father deeply. She ended the letter with a manipulative olive branch. I hope that one day you will be mature enough to understand the damage you have caused and will be ready to ask for our forgiveness. Your family will be waiting. I read the letter, and for the first time, I laughed. It was so perfectly them, so completely blind to their own role in the disaster. They still thought they were the victims. They still thought I was the one who needed to apologize. I took the letter, walked over to the small, decorative bowl I'd made in my pottery class, and lit the corner of the paper with a match. I dropped it into the bowl and watched it burn, the elegant cursive turning to black, curling ash. It was a final, symbolic act of release. I was no longer the unseen pillar. I was the architect of my own life. Ben would have been proud of the metaphor. I was drawing my own blueprints, laying my own foundation, and building a life on my own terms. The structure was sound. The view was beautiful, and for the first time I felt truly, unshakably at home.